I do have a question in regards because it doesn't sound like you're a big fan of wind and solar. I'm pretty much in the same boat. Like you said, they just don't seem to work nearly often enough as they should. But I was wondering what you believe to be the ideal ratio of energy sources. So, nuclear, fossil fuels, wind and solar, things like that. Um, where do you think the distribution of those things should go?
I have had a solar home in southern Baja, Mexico, where the sun shines over 300 days a year for 23 years now because there's no wires into this town. It's a little place called Cabo Pulmo on the Sea of Cortez. And it makes sense to use solar where there is no grid. If you're off grid, that makes sense for individual homes, but in Baja, you don't, nobody has heat. So, that's a big part of people's energy consumption where it's cold enough that you need to have your heat in your house. And that includes most of Canada and the United States and all the European countries. So to think that you can do all the heating and we have hot water, but it's with gas. It's not with electricity. And a lot of everybody has propane there because there is also no natural gas line into this community. But right now there's people saying we should ban gas stoves and use electricity to cook our food instead. Well, a lot of that electricity is being generated by gas, which is only about 50% efficient, whereas a gas furnace is 90% efficient. So when you put electric stove in your house, you're going to end up burning as much or more gas as if you just put gas in your house. And they are completely misguided in the direction they're going. Well, anybody who says we should end the use of fossil fuels in 20 or so many years has got to be, half brain dead or more, because that isn't going to happen. I mean, if we were to electrify all the vehicles, you'd need twice as much electricity. And at the same time, these guys are making it so there's less electricity. It just doesn't work in plain arithmetic. Wind and solar are essentially useless compared to the other three main types of generation, which is fossil fuels, hydroelectric, and nuclear. So you ask what mix I think is right. It really does depend on the resources you have to some extent. Brazil has 80% hydroelectric. Canada has 60% hydroelectric. Norway has 90% hydroelectric. So there are countries with mountains and a lot of rain, and you need both those things. Just mountains, there's no hydro. Just rain, there's no hydro. You need elevation and a lot of rainfall. And British Columbia happens to have the second largest assemblage of mountains in the world after the Himalayas. So here, where I am on Vancouver Island and in all of British Columbia, which is twice the size of Germany or something, we have almost 100% hydroelectric. But you can't do that in Texas. And you can't do that in many parts of the world. Saudi Arabia, I mean, it might have some mountains, but it doesn't have any water. So in those places, it seems to me that nuclear should now be put forward as the primary choice. It's really nice to hear that NuScale, which is building these small modular reactors, has now been approved by the Nuclear Regulatory Commission to build these. What they mean by modular is they're not built on site. They're built in a factory, sort of like mass production. So there's an assembly line where they're being built more than one at a time. They're 55, I believe, megawatts each, which is a small reactor compared to the 1,000 megawatt ones we have, but you can put 12 of them in one site. So all of a sudden, you're up to a pretty good sized power source. And this is hopefully what's going to happen. The problem is people have been scared about radiation. There's campaigns trying to scare people about radiation from nuclear reactors. There's nearly 100 nuclear reactors operating in the United States 24/7 for pretty much the last 50 years, and no one's even been injured by them, never mind killed. So they are one of the safest technologies we have, and they do reduce the reliance on fossil fuels. And the reason I think we should reduce our use of fossil fuels has nothing to do with CO2, which is a purely positive factor in the environment. It's what plants eat for their food. And it's what's making the forests of the world grow faster than they were when CO2 was so low. That's the irony of this thing, is that CO2 is lower now, even with our addition of additional CO2, than it has been for virtually the entire history of the Earth. When dinosaurs roamed and huge forests began to grow, CO2 was 5 to 10 times higher than it is today. And the Earth flourished. You just can't argue with that. But they're looking at like the last 200 years as if we have destroyed the planet with our CO2 emissions. It's completely incorrect. So the reason I'm in favor of reducing fossil fuels is because they are a limited, precious resource. And if you can do it with something else, and nuclear is the something else, if you don't have hydroelectric, and if you do have hydroelectric, I would say choose that first because it's clean. But these people are against dams. There's like as if there's too many lakes in the world. There are actually way more valleys than there are lakes. And damming one valley or two is not going to destroy the environment. And not only that, people like living around them. They have waterfront that they didn't have before. And so that's my position, is because we could reduce fossil fuel use for energy consumption by 50%, especially for electricity. Hydro and nuclear produce electricity, and therefore they can replace fossil fuels, which is coal and gas. I'm not saying we should do net zero. That's stupid.